Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. I have done many videos, far too many videos, on how awful the police are, and I have called for a root and branch change to everything, but particularly the disciplining, because you're getting too many officers who have charges made against them or accusations made, and they continue working. Nobody is examining, investigating, or doing anything about them. Well, it seems I'm not the only one complaining, and now ministers are looking at doing wholesale reforms of the police, and it's not before time. They're looking particularly at the disciplinary records and how to change how policemen are disciplined. Currently, it is incredibly difficult to fire a policeman. It takes a full investigation and inquiry, and it is something that takes a long time because their union reps can drag it out for years. We saw one earlier this week where a guy was being paid £400,000 over 7 years while the investigation plodded on. No pun intended. Well, we're going to take a look at this article where ministers are publishing radical changes that could see as many as 2,000 officers currently being investigated fired. And it isn't before time. Let's go. So, and it is about time. More than 2,000 rotten police officers could be sacked in an overhaul of the disciplinary system. Ministers will publish radical changes to make it easier to weed out the rogue cops after a string of scandals. I've reported on a lot of these, and obviously a lot of them are the Met, but most of them tend to be sexual in nature rather than, say, dishonesty, corruption, that kind of thing. But seems to be, there seems to be a pattern among the police about their abuse of their perceived authority. And finally, someone is starting to do something out about it. So more than 2,000 rotten officers could be sacked following the major overhaul of the police disciplinary system, set to be announced this month, following a succession of shocking scandals that have exposed flaws in the police vetting process. Ministers will publish radical changes to make it easier to weed out these rogue cops. The review into the process for dismissing the police officers was launched this year after the taking of Sarah Everard's life by a Scotland Yard officer, Wayne Couzens, and the jailing of his colleague, the prolific Ara of women, David Carrick. That's two. They worked together. One ended the life of a woman, and the other one just kept, attacking them sexually, because they are not the exceptions to the rule. The police is filled with people like this. You just go back and look after video after video after video. It's all sorts of perversions of people doing terrible things to women, to children. The police are filled with them. And people say, why do you go on and do so many videos about the police and how bad they are? I say it's because the police are really bad and people need to know. I always say the police are not your friend. And every video I do proves it. Even the good ones aren't whistleblowing, aren't standing up and saying so-and-so's doing this or that officer's doing that. And so by not whistleblowing, by allowing it to happen, they're complicit. Anyway, the Mail understands that the plan is to radically overhaul the process for getting rid of officers who commit misconduct, and is now going through the final clearance and set to be published within weeks. Government sources estimate some 2,000 police officers who are still in the ranks despite being accused of crimes, including sexual assault and corruption, could be sacked under the measures. Mark Rowley, the Chief Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, says that he has 1,000 officers, at least 1,000 officers in the Met, simply accused of sex crimes. Just that. He, in one force, has 1,000 officers. That tells you how bad the Met is. The Met, I say, needs actually to be broken up entirely. It needs to go into regional policing. At the end of last year, the Met Police Commissioner, Mark Rowley, said there were more than 500 officers in his force who are suspended or restricted because of misconduct investigations, but that he is unable to sack them. That's the 500 officers that are suspended or restricted. There's at least 500 more that have been accused which are not restricted or suspended. simply because they don't have the manpower to do it. This is how bad it is. The Metropolitan Police employs about a quarter of all officers in England and Wales. Sources expect the scale of misconduct at the Met to be replicated amongst other forces, meaning about 2,000 officers could be dismissed under new rules. Actually, it could be 4,000. It could be as many as 4,000, because if there's 1,000 in the Met, then that means there's 3,000 the rest of the country. 4,000 police officers gone because they're corrupt, or they're predators, or they're dangerous, and they need to be off the streets and in prison. Proposals will require all misconduct panels to be chaired by chief constables, sidelining the independent, legally qualified chairman of the LQCs. LQCs were given the powers by Theresa May following the fears the system was potentially self-serving, but police commissioners have become frustrated that the chairmen have the final say whether officers who commit serious transgressions should be sacked. Research published earlier this year found that when senior Met officers ran the forces disciplinary system, many more police accused of wrongdoing were sacked than by LQCs. So it turns out that the senior police officers, chief constables and similar ranks, are harsher and more demanding than the LQCs. I think we need even harsher ones. I get the impression, now this is just a personal impression, don't know the man, but if you can know him from his words and you can know him from the things he says and how he says it, I think Mark Rowley is a disciplinarian. I think if Mark Rowley could fire all the people he wanted to fire, he would do so, and he would do so without losing a night's sleep. I think he understands that the public perception of policing is that it is pretty damn rotten and that it needs to improve, and the only way you improve it is to make a big visual impact and fire the bad cops. Just get rid of them and hire new ones. But the major change, I think, and I've always said this, the major change is you need regular vetting. If you can't do it every year, at the very least, it should be every third year. Every single officer should be vetted. You can do it as a rolling system, but every 3 years a vetting goes through, and that's financial, behavioural, psychological. And just make sure that the police we have are trustworthy and aren't like that one yesterday, cowards or anything. That they are capable of doing their job. They're willing to do the job. These people are paid a good wage to do the job, and we need them to do it. Anyway, ministers believe the current process is convoluted and too slow, and wants police chiefs to be responsible for managing who works in their force. In another change, officers who fail to maintain their vetting status would be automatically dismissed, whereas now they can continue to work under current rules. And that's what we need. We need this vetting process put in place. So they are looking at changing the vetting rules, which is a very, very big plus. And the 6-stage process for removing officers for underperformance will be simplified to just 2 stages to make it easier to sack officers who demonstrate an inability or a failure to perform their duties, sources said. Officers facing the sack would still be able to appeal the decision to a police tribunal, which the Home Office hopes will ensure sufficient checks in the system. Yeah, I mean, you've got to have some fairness, I grant you. It could be that someone's underperforming, but nobody knows why, and he gets disciplined, and it turns out that there may be some major thing happening in his private life that was previously unaware of. Like a wife with cancer, some such like that, just an example. So obviously strains and stresses on the job, and that would affect anyone regardless of what job they were doing. So yeah, checks and balances, absolutely fine. But we're not talking about so much the ones that are underperforming for reasons or whatever. We're talking, first of all, get rid of the outright criminals. We'll deal with the lazy ones later. But number one, get rid of the criminals. A source added, the plan is very developed and is with number 10 for final approval, and it should be published in the next few weeks. It will radically overhaul the process for getting rid of police officers who commit misconduct. Once approved, the proposals should come into force within months because there is no need for new laws, and rogue officers could be dismissed as early this year. Yeah, it doesn't need a law because it's a behavioural thing. It's not. There's no act that controls how police work. Police work by a set of rules agreed by the senior officers. All you do is changing the rules. The Home Office launched a review into the process of police officer dismissals in January, following concerns about the standards and culture within policing. The culture is terrible. And there's Mark Rowley. Like I say, I actually do think he is very much pro these rules. I think, and it wouldn't actually surprise me if he is one of the guiding lights behind it and pushing this. Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, said at the time that it was necessary and needed to be easier to sack bad officers and to ensure bureaucracy and unnecessary procedure does not prevail over ethics and common sense. Cousins could have been identified as a sex offender 6 years before he abducted Ard and ended the life of Miss Everard. And Carrick passed his revetting after officers failed to put together a series of complaints about his predatory behaviour. He was sentenced in February to a minimum of 30 years for 24 counts of R against 12 different women while serving as a Met officer, and I can guarantee he's not the only one. Had been repeatedly reported for domestic abuse since joining the police in 2001, but those allegations were not taken seriously. That's half the problem. That's the cultural problem within the Met. Cousins and Carrick both served in the Met, and the shock review earlier this year found that the force may harbour many, many more predatory officers. Baroness Casey, who spent a year examining Scotland Yard's culture and practices, described the Met as institutionally racist and corrupt, as well as misogynistic and homophobic. And it really is. And so he's come in after the last one, and he's the new broom sweeping clean, and I think he means it. I actually do think he will be a force for good. He will get rid of all the bad ones, or as many of the bad ones as he possibly can, and put trust back in the public with the police, because it is always policing by consent, but you don't consent to criminals. And I shall stop there and I shall come up. Now, as I say, I do the videos every week, 2-3 times a week, sometimes 4 times a week, but I'm sure that you out there in YouTube land, you get your local papers, you hear the things at the local level where cop done for this, or arrested for that, or something else has happened here. Little local bits that don't necessarily make it to the national news. It happens far too often. I think the culture of the police is partly to blame. It attracts those people who want to be policemen. It attracts those who think being a policeman gives them the right to do just about anything they like because they're part of the club, and nobody will say anything against a policeman because they are the ones who uphold the law. And most of the time they appear to be right, which is why so many of them get away with so much. The big cultural change, the most important cultural change the police can have, though, is to make sure that existing officers, when they see an officer do something wrong, report it. Report it to a senior officer, and that the senior officer deals with it. It absolutely must be dealt with. Even if it's an investigation, it turns out that the guy saw something. If he saw something he thought was dodgy, turns out it wasn't dodgy, that's fine. And you go back to the original officer and you say, look, we've investigated, in fact it was this and this and this, but nobody says anything. It's anonymous whistleblowing, if you like. Nobody should be allowed to get away with anything, but one thing, the worst crime, is keeping your mouth shut. Make passing on of information, make sure that whistleblowing is seen as virtuous, and be the one that does whistleblow. Have a race to be the one that whistleblows rather than the one that covers it up, because it doesn't do the police any good. Anyway, I shall stop there. Thank you very much for watching. If you like what you see and hear on the channel, please hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, leave a like, leave a comment, please share that video, and until next time, stay safe, stay well, never trust a policeman, but maybe in a few months, and goodbye.